I used to enter rooms already preparing, not in a deliberate way, not like I stood outside the door rehearsing lines, but in the quiet, automatic way the body learns to protect itself. Shoulders lifted slightly, smile arranged, voice tuned half a note brighter than my natural one. I would scan faces and clothing and laughter, and in the space of a second I would decide what version of myself was most useful to bring out. I didn't think of it as performance back then. I thought of it as being on, being charming, being capable, being someone people liked. I thought that was just adulthood, just etiquette, just the cost of belonging. But there was always a deeper motive beneath the polish. If I was impressive, I was safe. If people admired me, they couldn't dismiss me. If I could make them laugh or make them lean in, I could hold my place in the room. The day I stopped trying to be impressive was ordinary on the outside. It wasn't a dramatic turning point you'd write down in a diary with a thick underline. It was a dinner party on a cold evening, the sort of gathering that looks effortless in photos, but always feels a little tight around the edges in real life. The table was long and wooden, worn smooth in places, with candles spaced down the middle like tiny watchtowers. The light made everything look warmer than it was. Glasses caught amber glints, plates clinked softly, the air smelled of roasted vegetables and wine, and the faint sweetness of something baking in the kitchen. I arrived with a bottle and a smile and that familiar readiness in my chest. People were already talking, the conversations layered over each other like music played from different rooms. There were the bright voices, quick and confident, the kind that rise easily above the rest. There were the quieter ones, careful and contained. Everyone looked a little dressed up, but not too dressed up. A careful balance of effort and ease. I felt the old instinct flicker alive. Say something interesting early. Establish yourself. Be memorable. Be useful. Don't drift into the background. I sat down and listened, and it was the usual parade of small victories and tidy narratives. Someone had been promoted and spoke about it with practiced modesty. Someone else had bought a house and described the renovation with the tone of a person who expects admiration. Another person joked about a new health kick, and the laughter that followed felt slightly rehearsed, as if everyone knew which parts they were meant to applaud. And I felt something in me tighten. Not jealousy exactly, not bitterness, more like fatigue. A deep tiredness that didn't come from work or age or lack of sleep, but from the constant pressure to be someone in every room, the constant editing, the constant calculation, the endless work of appearing composed and desirable and smart and interesting. At one point, someone asked a question about travel, and I had a story, a good one too, the kind of story that would have landed well. It had a funny detail. It had a moment of tension. It had a tidy ending. I felt it rise in me like a rehearsed monologue ready to be delivered. I opened my mouth, and then I didn't. It wasn't a moral choice. It wasn't humility. I just suddenly didn't want to. There was a strange moment of stillness inside my own body, like a curtain dropping. I leaned back in my chair and watched the candlelight move across the rim of my wineglass. I listened to the voices continue without me, and instead of panic, I felt something close to relief. The room did not collapse because I didn't perform. No one looked at me with disappointment. No one demanded that I produce a better version of myself. The conversation flowed on, like a river that doesn't care whether one particular leaf joins it. That realization should have frightened me. For years I had believed I was holding something up, that my presence, my brightness, my contribution was what kept me relevant. But sitting there, letting the moment pass without trying to claim it, I felt something loosen. I began to notice how much everyone else was doing the same thing, not maliciously, not arrogantly, just performing, curating, choosing the right anecdote, timing the laugh, offering a little vulnerability only when it was safe and flattering. A person at the far end of the table told a story about a mistake at work, but it was delivered in a way that made the mistake charming. Someone else admitted they were overwhelmed, but their overwhelm sounded productive, like proof of importance. I realized I had done that my whole life. I had packaged myself into something easily admired. I had mistaken admiration for connection. Admiration is distance. It's a spotlight you stand under, alone. Connection is warmth. It's closeness. It's being seen without needing to shine. And I was tired of shining. Between the main course and dessert, the host brought out a cake. Someone joked about calories. Someone else insisted they were being good. The laughter that followed had that familiar edge, everyone pretending it was casual while secretly negotiating their own fears. I looked at the cake and I thought about how many years I had spent making every choice in public. Not just what I wore, but what I ate, how I laughed, how much space I took, how loudly I spoke. Even my silence had been strategic at times. I had been living as if invisible judges were everywhere. And then, very softly, something in me said, "Enough." Not as a battle cry, not as rebellion, just as a quiet truth. When someone finally turned to me and asked what I'd been up to lately, I felt the familiar urge to offer something impressive, a project, a plan, a goal, something with momentum. Instead, I told the truth. "I've been walking," I said, "just walking, trying to slow down." It landed in the room like a small stone dropped into water. Not dramatic, just different. No one applauded, no one leaned forward. A couple of people nodded politely and moved on, and I felt something in my chest unclench. It was the first time in a long time I had spoken without trying to produce a reaction. Driving home later, the streets were quiet. The windows of houses glowed softly, each one its own small world. My breath made a faint cloud against the glass. The radio was off. I could hear the hum of tires on wet pavement, the occasional hiss of another car passing, the gentle rhythm of my own thoughts. I realized how much of my life had been spent seeking confirmation. Confirmation that I was attractive enough, smart enough, interesting enough, worthy enough. I had disguised it as ambition, as confidence, as humor. But underneath it was the same old fear. If I am not impressive, will I be overlooked? And here was the strange, liberating truth. Being overlooked is not the same as being unloved. Sometimes being overlooked is simply being unburdened. The next morning, I woke with a softness in me, not happiness exactly, more like steadiness. I made tea and stood by the window, watching a pale sky and bare branches moving slightly in the wind. The world looked the same, but I felt different inside it. That day, I noticed how often I reached for impressiveness without meaning to. In small conversations, I would start to inflate a story, to make it sound more significant, to earn a smile. I caught myself doing it at work, choosing certain words to sound more competent than I felt. I caught myself doing it even when I was alone, thinking about what I should be achieving, as if some invisible audience still needed proof. But now, the catching mattered, because when you notice the performance, you can choose whether to continue it. I started experimenting with being ordinary, with telling stories without polish, with admitting I didn't know things, with leaving pauses in conversations instead of filling them, with letting someone else be the entertaining one while I simply listened. At first, it felt like walking without shoes after years of wearing stiff ones. Exposed, slightly awkward, my instincts kept reaching for the armor. But gradually, I began to feel stable in a new way. When you stop trying to be impressive, you lose a certain kind of attention. The quick validation, the flattering reactions, the little sparks of approval. And part of you mourns that, because approval can feel like warmth. But you gain something steadier. You gain your own company. You gain consistency. You stop splitting into versions of yourself depending on who is watching. You stop living as a collage of performances. You become one piece. And the surprising thing is, people often come closer when you stop trying to dazzle them. Because dazzle keeps them at a distance. It asks them to admire you from afar. It doesn't invite them into the quiet corners. In the weeks after that dinner party, I noticed how many of my friendships had been built on performance. We traded stories like currency. We compared busyness, compared accomplishments, compared how well we were holding it all together. It wasn't cruel, it was just the water we swam in. But I started offering something else, not confessions, not drama, just honesty, the kind that doesn't demand a response. Sometimes it made the conversation softer, sometimes it made it awkward, sometimes people didn't know what to do with it. I learned quickly that not everyone is comfortable around someone who no longer performs the expected role. And that was another kind of clarity. The world is full of rooms where you are rewarded for being impressive. Workplaces, social circles, even family gatherings. There is nothing wrong with competence or skill or shining when you want to, but there is a difference between shining because you enjoy the light and shining because you are afraid of the dark. I had been shining out of fear, and I didn't want to live that way anymore. There are days now when I still feel the old instincts rise. When I'm in a room with certain people, or when I feel uncertain, or when I think I might be dismissed. The body remembers, the mind reaches for its old tools. But now I can pause. Now I can ask myself, what am I trying to prove? And often the answer is nothing that actually matters. I think there is a season in life, a second season perhaps, when impressiveness starts to feel heavy. When the armor that once protected you becomes something you want to put down, you realize you don't want to spend your remaining energy polishing a surface. You want to live underneath it. That dinner party didn't change my life in a way anyone could see. No one texted me the next day to say I seemed different. There was no dramatic after. The world didn't reward me for stepping out of performance, but I felt it. I felt the quiet freedom of not auditioning. I felt the relief of speaking without measuring the impact. I felt the sweetness of being present instead of impressive. And the strangest part is, I didn't become smaller when I stopped trying to impress. I became clearer, like water settling after being stirred. And in that clarity, I finally recognized myself steady, unpolished, and enough